Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ChMC Masterclass digital event. My name is Natasha and I'm an events delivery coordinator at the CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to David to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. And the event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David McLaughlin, ChMC Assessment Manager at CMI, to begin this event. You're on mute, David.
Is that better? Great. Thanks, Natasha, and welcome everybody to this morning's event. I want to cover a couple of things with you this morning. I'm going to talk about why we have a Chartered Management Consultant first and how that came about being, and a couple of the routes to getting to the point where you can apply for assessment. And then we're going to talk about assessment and talk about what that covers and what's involved with that. And then we're going to open up to some questions as well. So I guess the first question is, why Chartered Management Consultant? Why do we need this kind of status? Well, if we think about the management consultancy industry, there are a number of challenges for the industry as a whole. And it's about harmonizing consistency of professional standards, harmonizing that consistency across the environment for management consultancy, and enabling clients to understand what it is that they're buying, rather than just basing something on price and going for the cheapest option. The status gives you a badge to say we are operating at a value and a quality that is acceptable across the organization. It's a recognized quality. It's a recognized how you add value to your clients and how you add value to what you do in the management consultancy arena. It's about attracting the best possible talent and retaining that talent as well, and looking for people who meet the standard, people who are working towards the standard and can clearly achieve the standard. Gives you a much stronger workforce and a much better consistency and quality across the piece. It's also about building a sustainable community of professionals as well, equally assessed across the same criteria, so we can all stand up and say, I meet this standard consistently, and I add value, and this is how I add value, and this is how I make a difference to my clients. And doing that in a way that's recognizable and measurable for all of us. So what is chartered management when we think about becoming a chartered management consultant? But this isn't something that we've just sat and thought this would be a good idea. Let's develop this status and put it out there. We were awarded the opportunity to do this by the Privy Council. When I say we, CMI, were awarded by the opportunity to do this by the Privy Council. And we are the only awarding body that can grant people this status. And it's quite a challenging route to be granted the status as well. This is by no means a way of grandfathering in people that have got 20 years experience and just saying, you've got this, you're this hierarchy in your firm, so we'll just give you the badge. It doesn't work like that at all. The assessment process is the same for everybody. We haven't developed this in isolation. We've developed this in partnership with the MCA and with a number of firms that were involved in the Trailblazer part of this project as well. And those firms in the MCA are the people that have led the criteria, have agreed the way that we will assess people, the way that we measure people against those criteria. And this is not just something that we've done. This is a really joint piece across the whole of the management consultancy arena. And because of that, it is very much aligned to industry-wide competencies and the competencies that are required by a management consultant when they're adding value, when they're adding benefit to the client. It is about value adding not only for the client, but for you as well. And it's very much an opportunity to reflect on your own practice over the years and how many of us get that opportunity to stop, to sit down and say, actually, what have I done? I go from one job to the next, to the next, to the next. I look after this client, I look after that client. I'm only as good as my last client. What have I done that brings me to that point? Where have I grown? And what's the roadmap that's got me from my first engagement to where I am now? It's a real opportunity to reflect on that as well. This isn't a academic qualification. This is a professional status, and it is based on real hands-on practice and experience. And what we're looking for is what you've done. And I'm going to talk about that a bit later as well, because that's really, really important. But this is also recognised by Cabinet Office and will become the benchmark across management consulting as we move forward. And once the government get behind it, it will become a requirement in order to pitch and in order to work with the government. So there's lots of reasons why we have this, and we believe that this is a really good status to be awarded and says a real lot about you as an individual and as firms. So there are a lot of firms involved. I'm not going to read all these out to you. I'll let you look at this, but there were 10 firms involved from the start. And as I say, they've helped to develop this and they've helped to monitor it. And we have a system whereby they can dip in and out to look what's going on now, to reassure themselves that we're still meeting the targets in terms of quality and standard that we were set out to do at the beginning. There are a whole load of other firms who are going to be commencing with us soon and putting through candidates to try and be awarded the status. Again, I'm not going to read these to you, but there's some significant firms there. You can see these for yourself. So this is really starting to gather momentum now. And by the end of this month, we'll have had over 500 people will have been awarded the status of ChMC. So that gives you an idea of how this is growing, how this is moving on. And as I say, this will become the standard for management consultants across the piece. So that's all very well me saying that, but what are other people saying? Well, we carry out regular evaluations, and as you can see here, some very, very impressive numbers on evaluation. 100% of people say it recognises their proven track record, and that reflects on what I was saying about that self-assessment piece, that self-reflection and saying, you know, how have I got here from where I started? 98% of people asked said it demonstrates integrity and commitment to ethics. And integrity and ethics is a big part of what we do when we're assessing you for your ChMC status. So be prepared to be challenged on your ethical behaviour. Be prepared to be challenged appropriately and rigorously by a professional peer. Now, all the assessors are professional peers, they're professional assessors, and they are management consultants as well. And they've all been through this journey. They've all been awarded the status because of their history and because of what they're currently doing in terms of the management consultant sphere. A lot of people were questioning about the impact of becoming a ChMC, and as again, you can see some really impressive numbers there. And a net promoter score of 79% is really, really impressive. That's what people are saying. They would recommend this to their peers, their colleagues. They would recommend this to friends and family without hesitation. You know, this is becoming the de facto standard for management consultants. So how do you get to the point where you can submit an application for submission? Well, there are a number of pathways to get into assessment. The two main differences are based on levels of experience. So we have an on-program route, which either comes through an in-house training program or through the acquisition of a professional consulting qualification. If you have either of those, if you come either of those routes, you have to have at least 5 years experience operating as a management consultant. Now, I can't stress that enough. It's 5 years experience operating as a management consultant, not 5 years experience working with a management consultancy firm, but operating as a management consultant. The other route that we have is what we call the experienced professional route, and that comes in at 7 years plus. So if you've got more than 7 years working, operating as a management consultant, you can submit an application down that route. Now, the main difference with those two is the amount of evidence that we're asking for, the amount of narrative that we're asking for on the submission form. If you come through the experienced route, you have one less section of the form to fill in. If you come through the lesser experienced route, you have additional evidence that you can give and additional opportunities to prove your worth. Now, all of that is checked in two ways, and we're going to talk about that as we go through as well. There are the ChMC status links to a number of other professional statuses, but having other professional statuses doesn't give you any advantage to becoming a ChMC. We don't say, oh, you're a member of MCA or you're a member of IC, so we're going to give you the status. That doesn't give you anything. It just recognizes where you are, where you've come from, but the assessment process is exactly the same. Exactly the same as there are links to Chartered Manager. The Chartered Manager is about managers and leaders. Chartered Manager is not about consulting. So there are links in the sense that it offers you the same professional recognition, but it is a different operating environment in which we're awarding you that professional recognition. So that's how we get to it. That's what it's about. Let's have a think now about how assessment works. And these are the bits that you're going to be much more interested in, I guess, because these are the bits that are going to affect you as individuals. So the assessment journey is quite a rigorous one, really. Once you're ready for assessment, you've decided that you're ready to be assessed. You will submit your application form, and this is all done online. Everything we do is done on an online platform. So we don't ask you to send things through the post or anything like that. It's all done on an online platform. You will submit your application, and your submission will be reviewed by one of my assessors. Once they've picked it up, they will notify you that they are going to be your assessor. They then have a fixed period in which to look at your written submission, and they will carry that out virtually, and they will look at that in the background. If that meets if that meets the requirements, they will contact you again to arrange a professional discussion where you will be asked to corroborate your evidence, to back up what you're saying. We can all tell a good story, but can you walk the walk as well? The evidence that you submit at the written application stage, the written submission stage, has to be verified by somebody else who you have nominated as your sponsor. And that person has to be an appropriate and correct person in order to do that. You can't get your friend to do it. You can't get your mum to do it. It needs to be somebody who's in the environment, and ideally somebody who already holds the ChMC status. There's a bit of a chicken and egg there, obviously, because not everybody has it yet. And it's, we're talking about 500 people. You may not have come across somebody who has already achieved it. But the person you nominate has to be a right and proper person and be able to make considered judgments about the work you do and the value you add and the difference you make. Most applications are moderated, depending on the experience of the assessor and the time that they've worked with us. But there is a moderation process which looks at it to say that yes, this has been assessed fairly, consistently, and clearly. And that's not to double assess. That's to say that everybody gets a fair crack at the assessment process. You will then be informed of the outcome of your submission. And if you are successful, you will be awarded the status and you will receive your certificate in due course. If you're unsuccessful, and I want to be clear here that you can fail this. This is not like an NVQ where you just keep going and going until you get it. You can fail this. You will be notified of the failure, and you will not be allowed to reapply for 6 months. Once you have passed and you are awarded the status, you can use the post-nominal status of ChMC to indicate to everybody that you come across, or everybody that comes across you, that you hold this status and you are a recognised professional as a management consultant. So what are we looking at? Well, there's a number of things that we look at. We have a competency framework, and as I say, this was designed and developed by by CMI, MCA, and the original 10 firms that were involved in the Trailblazer pilot for this. And we're assessing your management consulting experience. Now, don't fall into the trap of managing experience. This is management consulting experience. So we look at 4 main areas. We look at values, ethics, and behaviors. We look at your leadership and management skills in a management consulting environment. We look at how you operate with your clients in the client operating environment. And really importantly, we look at your personal and professional development as well, your CPD. How have you got to here, and how are you going to stay at the top of your game once you've been awarded the ChMC status? We're looking for you to provide evidence for all of those in the first place, in the written evidence, and then we will check that in the professional discussion element of the assessment as well. We want you to showcase your most notable engagements. There is a word count, and the word count is there for a specific reason, but we want you to tell us how you've made a difference, where you've really made a difference, where you've really added value. And this is all about you, that we're not assessing your firm, we're not assessing the people that you work with, so we don't want to hear about a particular client or a particular manager in a client. And actually, if you do that, then you break the confidentiality rules, and your submission will be chucked back at you, and you'll be asked to do it again. And your legal department will be notified as well in your firm, if you're in a firm, so that they can clear up their end as well, and it will be removed from the submission system and will be completely deleted and you will have to start again. So don't fall into the trap of doing that. It doesn't add anything to it because we're assessing you and the difference you've made, not anybody you've worked with to add gravitas to your claim, not a firm that you're employed by to add gravitas to your complaint. This is all about you. Now, for some of us, that's really difficult to do because that's not how we're encouraged to be. And that's a real challenge for a lot of people. So bear that in mind when you are putting together your submission and when you're arriving at your professional discussion. So before you think about putting all your evidence together, there are some guiding principles that I like to use. And the first one, which I use a lot, is 6 Serving Men by Rudyard Kipling. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. The names are what and why and when and how and where and who. And if you use those, that what, why, when, how, where, and who, I think it's much easier to craft something, whether it be a report, whether it be a suggestion, whether it be your evidence for your submission to be assessed. Now, that's what I like to use. Some people also like to use a STAR framework, which is situation, task, action, and result. What did you do? Where did you do it? What action did you take? How did it come about? And what happened as a result of that? Some people like to go back to school and think about the scientific method. You know, what am I doing? What happened? What's the outcome as a result? So whatever works for you, but I would suggest you adopt a framework of tools that help you put things together in a clear, a very clear way. Now that will help 2 things. It will help you make sure that you've shown yourself in the best possible light, but it will also, let's be honest, make it easier for your assessor to say, yes, let's move on to the professional discussion. Let's move you on now rather than asking for more evidence. Get it done in one go. We can move you on to the professional discussion. We can check you there. We can have that professional discussion. We can understand a lot more about you, and then we can award you the status. So 2 things to think about: clarity for you, clarity for your assessor. So when we're looking at the evidence, we use a system called VAX. And what VAX does is we look at it and we make sure that your evidence is valid. It relates to the competencies. Now, because you have a word count, and it is a very tight word count, and again, I make no apologies for that. There are reasons behind that. It's important that you only put stuff in there that's valid, that aligns to the criteria, that shows you in your best possible light. We're not looking for fluff. We don't measure on weight. It's all about how valid is the evidence. Is it saying anything good about you? We look for that evidence to be authentic. So you're only submitting evidence that relates to your own performance. If you are part of a team and you are using team experience as part of your application, what did you do in that team? What was your role in that team? How did you make a difference to the team? Not what did the team do, not how successful the team was, but what was your part you played in that? And a good way to think about that is, if I wasn't there, would the team still have been successful? If I hadn't have done what I did, would the team still have been successful? And that's a good way of looking at it and saying, okay, so what did I do? What difference did I actually make by being there? So think about that. Think about being authentic. Think about the currency of the evidence as well. And here we're talking about currency means that you're still using evidence that's related to skills and knowledge that you currently demonstrate. Now, again, that sounds quite complicated, but if I give you an example here, my first degree is in IT. I haven't done anything with IT in 20 years. So to say I use IT skills, apart from the skills that we all use in terms of engaging with Word and Excel and all the things that we do, my IT skills are no longer current. It would be like asking somebody who trained on vintage cars to fix the airplane you're about to fly to Spain in. It wouldn't be a good idea. So, that's no longer current. Is the evidence that you provide sufficient? And the really good question to ask yourself here is, have I given enough for the assessor to say yes? Have I left any gaps where the assessor might say, how have you covered ethics here? Because there's nothing in here about ethics. And a really good opportunity here is, if you've got somebody in your firm, or somebody if you're independent who's been through this process, get them to have a look at it before you submit it. Because somebody who's seeing it from the outside can see gaps much clearer than you can when you're inside. So the whole thing, isn't it, about, you can't see the wood for the trees. But it is very real. You think you see what you think you've written, and it isn't always the case. We tell ourselves stories, we blindside ourselves. So we got to that point, we're ready to submit. Now we think about what does this involve? Well, it involves the written submission. There's one template, but many routes can come to them. I've mentioned that. There's different parts that you have to fill in depending on your experience level. There is a professional discussion, and then importantly, the ongoing continuous professional development. And what that means is that every year we will come to you on the anniversary of your status being awarded, and we will ask you for your CPD, your professional development report. What have you done? This is what you said you were going to do. How has that worked out? What difference has it made? What are you planning to do in the next 12 months to stay at the top of your game? Because remember, this isn't a dry academic status that we get and we've forever got our GCSEs, or if you're as old as me, your O levels. We've always got those. Nobody can take those away. This can be taken away because it's a professional status, not an academic qualification. You have to demonstrate how you're staying at the top of your game. So the written submission, few questions you want to think about with the written submission. Why should I be awarded ChMC status? And is my written submission making that clear? What difference have I made? And I emphasize the I because this is all about you. How have I made a difference? Not just the what difference, but how have I made that difference? Where was that difference measured? When did I make a difference? And who have I made a difference for? And who agrees? Because if you think, if you don't ask a right and proper person to be your sponsor, how can the person you ask agree that you've made a difference, where and when and how you've made that difference? So think about your sponsor carefully as well. Think about how you gather evidence. And I like to use this framework: collect, select, connect, reflect. So you want to be collecting as much evidence as you can. And if you're in training now and you're working towards a position where you can put in a submission, think about how you're collecting the evidence. And I would say collect as much evidence as possible. At this stage, there is no limit. Collect as much evidence as possible. Select the best of the evidence that demonstrates you in the best possible light. Connect that to the criteria. So what is that evidence saying? Is it in there for a reason? Then have a period of reflection and reflect on that evidence. Leave it for 24 hours, 48 hours, over the weekend, whatever works for you. Go back to it, look at it with clean eyes, with the criteria, and say, is this connecting to everything, or is it just there to fill up the word count? You need to be very careful about that. Put in only what works against the criteria to demonstrate you in your best possible light. And everything has to go in to the application form, and everything has to be is governed by the word count. You can't put in extra stuff. You put in your application template, and then you put in a CV, we won't look at the CV. If you put in loads of additional evidence, we won't look at that. We only look at the application template. And that's because of fairness and parity across the board. Clearly, there's a risk here that you have a situation where somebody puts in all the evidence that they can in the template, and we look at that, and we may or may not move them on to the next stage, depending on what's in the template. Somebody else puts in a template and 24 additional pieces of evidence, and we look at that, and we say, yeah, we can move that person on. There's no fairness there. There's no parity, because the first person could easily say to us, well, if I'd have put in another 5 pieces of evidence, I'd have got moved on. So it all has to be contained within the application template. This all sounds quite firm and quite grim, but it's not. This is all there to help you submit the best application you possibly can, to reflect you in the best possible light. So some key takeaway points from the written submission element. What difference did you make? How did you make a difference? Where did you make a difference? Why you? Why should we give you this status? Would someone who doesn't know you make sense of your written evidence? And that's a really good thing. Get that checked. Get somebody to read it. If there's too much jargon in there, if there's too much slang in there, too many acronyms, you might need to revisit it. It's about quality, not quantity. And a way to think of it is this will get you your ticket to the dance. So that's the first phase of this done. So now we move on to the dance. We've got you through that point. We move on to the dance and the professional discussion. So the professional discussion happens online. It will happen in a medium like this. We use Google. You will be invited to attend a session that has been agreed by you and your assessor at a time and date that's mutually agreeable. The session will last approximately an hour, but you're professionals. You need to allow time before and after in order to allow it to run on if it needs to run on. Now, I just want to clarify that a bit. If it runs on, and you end up an hour and 15 minutes, that in and of itself says nothing. If you stop after 55 minutes and the assessor has everything they need, that in and of itself means nothing. It doesn't mean going on means you failed, doesn't mean stopping early means you've passed. They will make a dynamic decision on whether they've got all the evidence they want to get from you in order for them to make a decision. It's about validating the evidence in your written submission, and they will discuss competencies that are related to your CPD, and they will very much challenge you on ethics as well. So be prepared for all of this. Turn up as well. Really make sure you turn up. Now, what I mean by that is not just physically, but turn up ready to go, prepared to have a real discussion with a fellow professional. This, as I say, this isn't academic. This is not 2 and 2 equals 4. This is about your experience, about how you've made a difference. And I keep banging on about this, but I really want to drive this home. This is about you. This is about how you've made a difference, not your firm, not the people that you've worked with, you. Make sure you leave enough time. Make sure you diarize enough time in order to allow this to run over if it needs to. You can fail it. It's not a test, and it's not a Q&A, and it's not an interrogation. It's a professional discussion, but you can fail the whole process. And if you fail, then you will have to wait 6 months before you resubmit another application. But the biggest point of the professional discussion is turn up, be ready to go. And if something happens that means you're not ready to do it, talk to your assessor. They are often very flexible. They will often rebook, but don't do that for no reason on the morning when you're supposed to be there at 10 o'clock. But life happens outside this, and we have to bear things in mind as much as we can. Give yourself the best possible chance. Treat us as you would an important client. Now, if you turned up an important client to do a pitch, and here what I'm saying is you're the pitch, and you're not prepared, and you're not ready, and you're not there to deal with challenges, and you're not actually mentally turning up, what's going to happen with that client? Well, think about that with us, because this is real world. This is real life. We want to see you in the real life environment. Be the consultant that you are on the day. Think about I, Captain. It's all about me, 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 me. Not the team, not anybody else, all about me. And if we flip this round and you were assessing yourself, would you give yourself the status, and why? Ask yourself that question. Because if you can't honestly answer, yes, I would, and I would because I meet all the criteria, I really explain how I make a difference, I really see where I add value, then you need to think about this again. So think about the ethical test. Think about, would I want my friends and family to see what I'm doing here at this professional discussion? Would I want the result of this to turn up on the front page of my local newspaper? How would I feel about that? If you're not happy to turn up in that way and have that in mind, you need to think about it again, do a bit more preparation before you turn up for the professional discussion. There's some things to think about here. The main goal really is we want you to succeed. We're not going to waste your time or ours putting you through a process where we think you have no chance of succeeding. We will contact you and we will say, we're not going to move you on at this stage, and this is why. There aren't any trick questions in this, and we're going to talk to some colleagues in a little while to get their experience of this. But there really aren't any trick questions. We're not looking to catch you out. We're just looking for you to demonstrate you as the best management consultant you can be. We want to hear about all the good stuff you've done, all the great stuff you've done, why you're here, and why should we give you this status. We want to give you this. Help us make that decision. So turn up. Take it seriously. Think of us for that hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever you've diarised in your diary, as the main client for that session. Treat us in that way. There are no givens here. This is not about hierarchy. This is about the difference you've made, and it's all about you. Now, I've talked about not getting through the first stage. I just want to touch on that briefly. If you get a referral, so you get 2 chances with your written submission. The first chance, that when you first put in the submission, we will look at that and say, yep, we'll take you to the next stage, or no, we want some more evidence. Now, if you get referred and we ask you for more evidence, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's an opportunity for you to shine what you've already submitted, to polish it up, to give us the extra little bits we need to get you the ticket to that dance, to get you to that professional discussion. So if you do get referred, please don't look at it and think, oh God, that's terrible. I know, why am I even doing this? It's a good opportunity for you to have another go, to make it easy for us to say, yep, that's all there. I can see exactly what you're doing. Let's move you on. Biggest takeaway of all of this, treat this as a real pitch. You're the engagement. You're pitching to us for this status. Get it right. make it the best you can possibly make it, and make it easy for us to say yes. That's the input from me. So we're going to go back now to join a couple of colleagues who have already been awarded this status, and we have some questions and answers we're going to deal with. Morning. And we're joined this morning, thankfully, by Melanie Franklin, who is an independent and continuous change consultant from Continuous Change Community. And Mel joins us this morning from Spain, so thanks, Mel. Also joined by Jess Ridout from BAE Systems, who's kindly joined us today as well to talk about their experience. So, guys, I want to start off really by thinking about the written submission, if we can. And when you think about that, what would you say was your most challenging thing about the written submission? I don't mind who goes first.
I'm going to say word count, and it took me 3 passes to get to that word count that you've been referring to. You gave a few examples of the kinds of headings you might use, like the star heading. I came up with my own structure, which is who I supported, specific actions, and impact of my actions. And that really helped me because it kept it focused. I didn't wander then. And so that structure was the most important thing for being able to answer the questions, I think. So that was my probably my biggest challenge, was finding a way that I could actually answer and share my experiences within the tight word count. I think probably Jess has got something similar to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most challenging about that written submission was ensuring that I had covered all the competencies whilst also telling a good story, and as you say, within that word limit. And by that, I mean, the written submission has to be concise with some of the strongest project examples. And the nature of consulting means we're typically involved in lots of assignments and move between clients. So one thing I found that really helped me was actually revisiting my performance reviews and reminding myself of those previous projects. And then I could compare those to the competency framework, which allowed me to choose the strongest project examples. And once I'd done that, I then thought about the competencies on the framework that I wanted to highlight within that project, and then work the story into that. So using examples from the situations within that project. And I think David and Melanie, you've given some good examples there of STAR and the who, the six men. So yeah.
I'm an independent, so I don't have any performance reviews. I just constantly beat myself up. But what I did was I just looked back over the last year and I thought, right, what are the 3 major sort of consulting assignments I'm currently covering? They're for different clients. They're doing different things. So I thought, right, okay, I'll use that. So that was also a deliberate decision to keep it current as well. Because something David said about the fact that he knows nothing about technology now, apparently. I think he does, but, I get the idea. We want it to be current. So I thought, do you know what? Set yourself a year. Just go back. You've been busy. You've got plenty to write about. So just stick within the year, keep it current. And then also, if you're in a professional discussion, I think it is helpful to be able to recall things because you will be asked about them. So if you've gone too far back, then that's going to be really, really difficult to recall.
I think that's a really good point, Mel. I think I'm going to just jump in here and mention something about the word count, really. And I keep saying I make no apologies for the word count. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is that we think that communication is a really important skill for a management consultant, and using that, that ABC, that accuracy, brevity, and clarity is really, really important. And the other thing is, if we think about this in the real world, if I'm a client and I say to you, I want you to put in a submission for some work, and I want it no more than 4 pages. If you then submit 250 pages or 25 pages or whatever it is of application, the client's not going to look at it. The client's going to go, well, this is not what I wanted. So we think that's a real skill, and hence I make no apologies for the fact that we're saying to people, you can't run on and on and on all day.
It makes me think of Winston Churchill's quote, "I'm sorry, I didn't have time to write a shorter letter."
Absolutely.
Because it really does take the effort to write the short summary, and it also makes you really concentrate I think on the key points. I like what David said about the fact that you are presenting a client presentation. It happens to be about you rather than anything else, but it is certainly, as if I'm evaluating these things, what I'm looking for is I just want to see the evidence. And I'll also pick up on the point David said about, I really want to hear the evidence about you, because it is you that's being rewarded with charter status, not your firm or not the team. And we don't know anything about the team and we don't care. It was what you did. So your team might have achieved something. Please don't tell us about that. Tell us what you did as part of that achievement, because it is all about you.
Absolutely. And as I said in the presentation, for some of us, that's the hardest thing in the world, because we're brought up to be team players. We work in organizations where it's all about us. It's not about we. It's it's us and it's we. It's not about you. But that's really hard for people, and I think that's a real good lesson and a real good point, Melanie.
Mm-hmm.
I want to move on. I'm conscious of time, and we want to get some questions from the floor. So I'm just going to move on to my next point. We've covered the written submission. What would you say was the biggest challenge about the professional discussion?
I actually really enjoyed the professional discussion. My main concern was whether the tech would work on the day, but it was fine. And once the first few questions were out of the way, I kind of felt like I got into the flow of it. And it was really nice to talk about the work I've been doing. I think one of the nice things as well is that you're able to talk about, bring out more examples that you couldn't fit into the word count. So you're able to really illustrate some of your points with a bit more colour and really show the breadth of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Make it come to life.
Indeed, yeah.
I found mine really challenging. I think I had a great assessor who was trying to dig under the initial submission and get more examples. And you're right. I found it thought-provoking, actually, because it was talking about, well, what have you achieved? What was the difference you made? Because you're trying to evidence those, I think, those competencies. What I found really interesting is there was a conversation about ethics, and it was sort of heartwarming to think, yeah, do you know what? My ethical values do actually flow through everything that I'm doing. And it's becoming very apparent as I talk that is absolutely true. I shared an example of how I had decided not to do a piece of work because I just didn't feel that the organisation sort of met my criteria in terms of diversity and inclusion, for example. Now, we don't always have that opportunity, but I mean, everybody's got different examples of their ethical values, but it was just really interesting because it's not something we get to talk about in work very often. So yeah, it was almost not a counselling session, was it, Jess? But it was definitely an opportunity to stop and think, I suppose.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the ethics point. That actually was a good conversation point within my professional discussion as well.
Yeah,
I think that's those points are really interesting. I think it kind of reflects on the big difference between having a statement and living the words that you're writing, isn't it? It's that we do this or we act like this. Well, how do you? And I think you're absolutely right. When you're challenged like that, it does bring it out and it does make you think, doesn't it? And say, well, yeah, I do this. It's not just words. We all have, I think all three of us here have slightly different specialist areas. And one of the things that is a big challenge when you're going through this process is how do you demonstrate that you are using techniques and skills and the criteria as a management consultant and presenting yourself as a broader practitioner when some of us have found ourselves almost down cul-de-sac sometimes within our careers.
I think, though, that all of us, if we're in consulting, let's go back to first principles. What does it mean to be a consultant? We facilitate, we guide, we signpost people to ideas and answers. We support them. We provide them psychological support as they adopt them. We provide them practical support with new information so we have to keep ourselves up to date. We have to have a very wide range of knowledge about lots of different things. I think if you're worried about that, go back to first principles and go, do I facilitate? Yes. Do I do active listening? Yes. Am I empathetic? Yes. How am I all of those things? Where's that coming from? And just maybe worry less about the competencies for a moment and just go to the heart of what it means to be a consultant, brainstorm that. And I think you'll then be able to sort of, for every idea you've come up with, you'll be able to align it back to those competencies. So I think that might be a way to come up with the content.
Yeah, brilliant.
Agreed. And I think as well with the experienced professional route, and actually with all of the routes in, you have to have a minimum number of years of experience, which means typically that you do get that broad experience. And I did use that within my professional discussion to draw out more of those points. And I think you're right, Mel. It's about talking about those key core consulting skills, but also bringing out examples where, you've not just been, the technical specialist within that project, but where you've also led and shaped engagements, or you maybe, depending on the engagement, you've covered multiple roles. So you've had to manage the project and that aspect of it, as well as being that technical specialist.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I am one thing that I found really helpful, because that made me think about my own development. Oh, I do that, but could I be better at it?
Yeah.
And I found writing the what are you going to do to improve in the next year really, really useful. I don't get the opportunity to step back enough and sort of go, well, how are you going to continue to develop? And I think we're all a work in progress. So I think that is incredibly useful. But one thing I found that I got the most out of doing the application was that I shut myself away with non-disturbable time so that I could brainstorm and be completely selfish. It's all about me. So I didn't want to be disturbed by other clients. And I got the most out of that, because that led me to think about a real assessment of where I'm at. What do I want to do in the next year to improve myself? And then I've booked, because I've got to prove it again in a year's time. And mine, I think, was in July. So a couple of months ago, I've put in my diary just the last day before Christmas holidays to do that review. And I've also put in my diary to do that review at the beginning of June, because I know it's coming up. Certain things I booked. I even booked myself on an exam course, and I'm taking the exam on November the 5th. So that's all booked in. I'm not sure I would have done all of that in such a structured way if I hadn't been filling in the application. And now that's a nice thing to have as an annual piece. So I'm really, really pleased with that.
Excellent. Thank you. That really, I think a lot of people really benefit from hearing that structure as well. I think I'm looking at time. We've got a bit of time to take some questions from the floor. Natasha, do we have questions from our delegates today?
We certainly do. So one of our questions from Andy is, the projects I've worked on are mainly security sensitive. How would evidence be assessed for these?
A good question, and one I think is probably easier for me to pick up on. The evidence that you are submitting doesn't need to name anybody. And what I mean by that is, if you're working in, say, the financial sector, we don't need to know that you're working for HSBC or Barclays. That's not going to add anything to your assessment, and will breach the confidentiality rules and we'll get chucked back again. We don't need to know that you're working with Mr. Smith in HSBC. So what you would put is, I worked with a client in the financial sector, and then talk about what you did in as broad a way as possible without breaking any security issues that you may have to deal with. But there will always be a way that you can talk about things in a much not vague, much more vague style, but in a way that doesn't breach the security issues. So take a little bit more thinking, but think about that as a way of doing it.
But I think also the fact is, we want to hear about your skills. We don't want to hear about any of the details. We want to know. So it goes back to those first principles. What have you done in terms of brainstorming solutions, facilitating solutions, pointing out the pros and cons to your clients, helping them make decisions. And we really don't want to know the details.
Yeah, absolutely. So what if the reference is from someone who's outside of the client organisation? And this kind of goes into a second part, which is also, what if the application comes from someone who works as an independent consultant? Which I suppose, Melanie, you'd be able to help us with that one.
Yeah, well, the first thing was that I had to find a sponsor. And the one thing I will say, and I have fed back to the team as well, is that it took me over 30 minutes to explain the scheme to my sponsor. So having a little scheme explanation for sponsors, potential sponsors, would be helpful, because I did have to run through it. They never heard of it. And this person is a CEO of a big organization. I don't think he cared. He was my first one. And in fact, I ended up going with the second one because he just couldn't get around to getting stuff done in time. So finding somebody who can give up the time would be helpful. Explaining the scheme is really important. And I think perhaps I do recognize as an independent that finding the sponsor who's going to sort of endorse you and reference you is a bit more involved than if you were in a firm, because it's kind of fairly obvious. You've got reporting lines you can turn to. But I will say I've done lots of these applications. I have all sorts of achievements in my, and nobody's ever turned me down. I think everybody's quite happy to help people support, but just be clear what you're asking them to do. And you might have to summarize some of the scheme or explain the competencies to them because they might not know anything about it. So just focus on explaining it to them first.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mel. Jess, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it. Obviously, I'm within a firm, so for me, it was obvious who there was a couple of people to potentially choose from. So I just spoke to a couple of people and went with one of those.
Brilliant.
So another question from Andy. So how long did it take from I think I'd like to become to actually becoming a chartered consultant?
I think Jess and I had different experiences. Jess, why don't you tell them what you did, and then I'll give a quick summary of what I did.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it took me quite a lot of time investment. I was finding that with my project work, it was quite involved, and I didn't have time in the evenings or the head capacity to put the application together. So I started doing it at weekends because I found that I really wanted to focus on the application. So I'd say it took me quite a long time, because although I was doing it kind of consistently, it was in little bits. So yeah, how long did it take me? I think I started it at the start of this year, and then I became chartered in July. Yeah.
Mine was a week, you see, because I did it completely differently, which was I thought, right, okay, this is something that needs to be dealt with. I need to get this done, just like any other customer presentation, any other customer submission. So I pushed aside a full half day and did my first pass at it. And then I did another half day. And that was so the first half day was getting to grips with the competencies and starting to brainstorm all the things that I could perhaps answer. The second half day was really working with the word count on my examples. And then the third half day was a full pass at it, including, and there was some elapsed time. So I did those 3 half days in a week. There was the elapsed time of talking to my sponsor and getting them on board. But the second sponsor really turned it around very quickly, and it was all done within 2 weeks. Yeah. I think that's one end of the scale to the other, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You mentioned about a couple of half days, within a week, and yeah, I think that it does take a few days, I'd say, to actually put the whole thing together. And yes, you might do that over an elapsed time. So yeah, it is a serious thing. You do have to make the time commitment and invest into it. It's not something you can just write in 5 minutes.
What I will add to that is once you register, the clock starts running. So don't register, or don't let your firm register you, whichever way you do it, until you're virtually ready to do the submission. Because once you register, you get 3 months in which to submit the evidence. And if we need more evidence and we come back to you as a referral, there is a 14-day clock on that as well. So wait till you're almost ready before you hit go.
Thank you. And now a question for you, David. So can a CMI Level 7 diploma in professional consulting with over 7 years track record apply for the Chartered Manager Consulting status?
As long as they meet the criteria, and as long as they can demonstrate how they meet the criteria as a management consultant, then yes.
That's a nice, easy one. And we'll just go for one final question, which, Melanie, is back over to you. So how did you select your sponsor being an independent? I'm guessing it's someone you work closely with, someone that you had that track record with, or was it someone?
Well, I had a few choices. The first CEO I went to, I'd done a particular assignment for. To be honest, we ended up having such a great discussion. I ended up doing some more work for him, and he still didn't write my sponsorship application. But that is the nature of the job, right? So the second person I went to, we co-chair a particular group together, and so I explained what I was doing, and as she knows my work from quite a few years as well, and I also felt, she really knows me in terms of values and ethics. So I thought, somebody who could. I think there were a couple of things. Somebody who I felt could write honestly, because it is about their integrity too, right? So she could write honestly about me and have no qualms about what she put down. And the second thing was it would be somebody you want to point at and go, actually, I'm really proud that I work with her. I'm really proud that she knows me. She is the kind of person I'd like to stand up in a room, pretending you're in a room for a moment, and stand up and say, I vouch for Melanie. So there is something in there, I think, about that connection with you. Would you want that person to vouch for you? You do have to ask yourself, you're asking somebody who's going to talk about your ethical standpoint, whether or not you agree with their ethical standpoint. So go to somebody you trust, somebody you believe in, and somebody you'd be proud to say, I vouch for Melanie. That really worked for me.
And Jess, within obviously your organisation, was it easier for you to find a sponsor as well? I mean, obviously these are people you work with every day, so I'm guessing that you would have that easier route, but was it something that you found easy to select between a few people?
Yeah, I made sure that it was someone who, as Melanie is saying, was really aware of the work that I had been doing and the impact that I had made, so that they could write a strong sponsor statement for me.
That's great. Well, we're coming to a close for the session. So, David, was there anything else you wanted to add on before we wrap up the session?
No, I don't think so. Just to ram home again once more, it is about you as an individual, not your firm, not the people that you've worked with, not the team that you're part of. Remember, it's all about you. This is your chance to stand up and say, look how brilliant I am.
That's great. Thank you. So that is it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you, David, and our special guests, Melanie and Jess, for your insights and expertise. For any additional information and guidance, please contact your firm's ChMC Program Manager or a member of the ChMC team, which you can contact at chmc@managers.org.uk. A recording of the webinar will be made available to all of those who registered for the event, and you can use the link in the live chat to book onto the next session taking place on Wednesday, the 13th of October. Please do take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing our evaluation form, and the link is in the live chat, and we'll also be sending it out with the recording. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.